I'm Mark Golub. Thank you for joining us as we continue Shalom TV's coverage of Israel in turmoil. It's been a hard 24 hours for the state of Israel. M302 rockets have struck Zichron Yaakov, just south of Haifa, and also hit the northern city of Hadera. Hamas is also proclaiming it has aimed rockets towards Dimona in the south, where Israel's nuclear reactor is located. And as we can all understand, Israelis throughout most of the country are now living under intense pressure and anxiety, even fear. Just imagine what it must be like to live hour by hour, minute by minute, knowing that at any moment, sirens could go off, warning of an incoming rocket from Gaza, and you only have minutes, sometimes seconds, to find safety for yourself, for your child, in the nearest bomb shelter. I want to show you a video of Tel Aviv right now. These are residents of Tel Aviv heading for bomb shelters after a warning siren has gone off. This is totally foreign to us. It's a totally foreign experience for Americans, for American Jews. We do not live in worry for the safety and well-being, for the very lives of our children, because rockets are being fired at us by an enemy sworn to annihilate us. And thus far, no rocket fired by Hamas or any other Islamic jihadist group in Gaza has taken an Israeli life, thank heaven. But that doesn't mean that these rockets have not had an enormous effect, have not taken an enormous toll on the emotional well-being of Israelis, especially Israeli children. It is a terrible, terrible way to live. I know that if this were happening in any community I was living in here in America, I would want the rocket fire stopped immediately. And I would expect the United States government to do anything necessary to end the rocket fire on my children and on me, which is also a fundamental Jewish ethical principle and value. At the heart of Jewish values is a requirement, a mitzvah, to save life, to protect one's own life, and to use whatever force is necessary to defend oneself and to protect one's life, even if it involves, tragically, taking the life of one's assailant. One is to use the minimum amount of force necessary to stop the assailant, but one is obligated, required, commanded as a mitzvah to use whatever force is necessary to protect oneself from harm. There are religious traditions which teach essentially to turn the other cheek. The Jewish tradition teaches, don't get struck on the first cheek, and certainly do everything you can to prevent yourself from being struck on the second cheek. And the Talmudic principle is expressed in the statement, you have no right to say another person's blood is redder than yours. No human being is of more intrinsic value than another. And no human being has the right to take the life of another, which is why in the Jewish tradition, the sixth commandment is not, thou shalt not kill, but rather is, thou shalt not murder. Murder is the wanton taking of another person's life. Again, tragically, there are times when killing in self-defense is a moral imperative. And when a country is under lethal attack, as Israel is now, with more than 220 rockets being fired by Palestinian terrorists in Gaza, Israel has more than every right to do everything it can to defend its citizens. It has the moral obligation to do so. Which is why Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made the following statement today.
Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza are firing rockets on cities throughout the state of Israel, on Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, Beersheba, Sderot, and other cities. No country on earth would remain passive in the face of hundreds of rockets fired on its cities, and Israel is no exception. Today we expanded our operations against Hamas and the other terrorist groups in Gaza. We'll continue to protect our civilians against Hamas attacks on them. Now Hamas, by contrast, is deliberately putting Palestinian civilians into harm's way. It embeds its terrorists in hospitals, in schools, in mosques, apartment buildings throughout the Gaza Strip. Hamas is thus committing a double war crime. It targets Israeli civilians while hiding behind Palestinian civilians. This operation could take time. We're resolved to defend our families and our homes. Today I spoke with several world leaders. I appreciated their expressions of strong support for our right and our duty to defend ourselves. And this is what we'll continue to do.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And now to amplify on how the Israeli government is responding to the rocket barrage from Gaza, we're pleased to have on our phones from Jerusalem, Ofir Akunis, who in addition to being a Likud member of the Knesset, is also Deputy Minister in the Prime Minister's office. Ofir, thank you once again for joining us.
Shalom, Mark, but I'm in Tel Aviv right now.
Okay, thank you for joining us from Tel Aviv. Ofir, we're aware
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ofir, we're aware that the Knesset and Israeli cabinet is often an arena for bitter political and ideological battles. Ofir, how much unity and consensus exists now among the 120-person Israeli government as to how the rocket fire and terrorism in Gaza should be brought to an end?
First of all, there's a huge consensus in Israel right now, huge consensus behind the government, behind the Prime Minister decision, and behind the cabinet, security cabinet decision. As you all know, Mark, Israel is under attack from the Gaza Strip terror organizations, especially the Hamas, but not only the Hamas,
yes,
the Islamic Brotherhood as well, and other organizations, but especially the Hamas. We are in the middle of an operation that its goal is to defend the people of Israel, and this operation will continue until calm is restored, and we'll do whatever is necessary to defend our citizens all over. It's almost all over Israel. It's not only on the southern side of Israel. Mm-hmm. It's almost all over.
Ofir, are you there? Did we lose Ofir?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Ofir.
No, I'm here.
Okay. Ofir, yeah, Ofir, the big question.
I'm with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ofir, the big question on the minds of all Americans is whether the cabinet will determine it's necessary to send ground troops into Gaza. What can you tell us about where the decision on such a move stands?
I really don't want to talk about it right now. The cabinet just finished its meeting 1 hour ago here in Tel Aviv, and I don't think that it's necessary that Israel will announce the terror organization, especially the Hamas terrorists, what we were going to do in the next few days or in the next few hours.
Okay.
I don't want to speak about.
Okay.
I want to tell you that there is no state in the world that can accept the fire rocket on her capital. There were rockets on Jerusalem 2 hours ago. There's a rocket on Tel Aviv in the morning, and there were rockets on Ashdod. It's nearby Tel Aviv, as you all know, half an hour ago. And we will not accept it, Mark. We will fight the terrorists as long as it will need, as long as it's needed. And in any way, I wanna tell you, we will do it any way.
I understand. Ofir, in general, can Operation Edge succeed by airstrikes alone?
Yes, if the Hamas will announce his survive, it's possible. As I told you, I don't want to speak in the media. I'm not doing it here in Israel, and I will not, with all the respect, we'll do it in your program, but we will do whatever is necessary. This includes everything. And Mark, I think that I told you this sentence, exactly this sentence, last week when we talked.
Yes.
After that, we find the bodies of the 3 teenagers. It was only 8 days ago. You can imagine what happened in our region. 8 days ago, it was just that we found the bodies in Judea area, in Judea desert, nearby Hebron, and right after, the Hamas starts his battle against the Israeli innocent citizens. Right after, and as you know, we said, and this was our policy, that if there will be a quiet, then it will be quiet in Gaza. But as you know, Hamas' decision was to escalate by extending its rocket fire on Israel. And I don't think that there will be, and there is, any state in the world, including the United States, that can accept a rocket on her cities all over, even not from Brooklyn to New York City, from Brooklyn to Manhattan.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely impossible.
Okay.
And we will do whatever is necessary to defend our citizens. I have to tell you that the people of Israel, and I will say to close this conversation, because I have an interview here in Channel 1 in Tel Aviv, and I have to go to the studio, I have to tell you that the people of Israel are very strong these days, very strong. The Israeli cabinet and the Israeli government is proud, very proud of our citizens. And citizens, even I met yesterday citizens in Sderot, in Ofakim, in Netivot, in the south of Israel, and they told me, tell to the Prime Minister to continue until Israel will win this cruel terror organization.
Ofir Akunis, I wish you all the best. Kol Tuva Hatzlacha. Again, as I said to you the last time we spoke, American Jewry and the American people is with you 100%. May you go from strength to strength, and we'll talk often. Thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and with the viewers and the listeners.
You are always welcome. Thank you, Ofir. That was Ofir Akunis, who is not only a Knesset member, but he is also a minister in the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, it's not only important to hear what somebody on the diplomatic end can say, we also thought it's important to hear from a spokesperson of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. So we're most pleased again to welcome back to Shalom TV Lieutenant Libby Weiss, who heads the North America media for the IDF. Libby, thank you again for joining us.
Of course. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So first, I'd like to ask you simply to summarize from your perspective anything you would like America to know. You know, it's a little after 10 p.m. in Israel as we speak right now, but what would you want not only American Jewry, but America as a whole to understand right now about Operation Protective Edge?
I really think that a major theme that's so important for, again, not only American Jewry, but the American audience, really a world audience, generally speaking, is really the nature of the enemy that we're fighting, the nature of Hamas. We're talking about a terror organization that actively uses its own civilians as human shields, and an organization, it's really a terror organization, one that believes in terrorizing an innocent civilian public, both the Israeli civilian public and really to use the Gazan public as human shields. And I think this is really an important point to note, which is at the end of the day, we are truly combating and fighting a terror organization in all definitions of the word.
Mm-hmm. Libby, there are reports on American television that while Israelis have warning sirens and bomb shelters, Palestinians have neither, suggesting that Palestinians in Gaza are at a distinct disadvantage. Do you have any comment on this observation?
Well, I think the fact that we see Hamas investing resources and efforts, and of course the foundation of their ideology, really looking to amass a weapons arsenal and to, at the end of the day, produce and acquire long-range missiles, I think this really shows at the end of the day the priorities of this organization. This is not an organization that's interested in implementing safety measures with the people in Gaza. This is an organization that invests its resources in M302 missiles. These are missiles with a range of 160 kilometers. And because we understand this, and because at the end of the day our priority, of course, is to not in any way, or to minimize as much as possible our impact on the Gazan civilian population, we find ourselves making distinct measures and taking distinct steps to try and prevent any harm to the Gazan civilian population in the form of phone calls before attacks, flyers, text messages, really other efforts that at the end of the day are meant to really lessen the attempts that Hamas has made to use its own civilians.
Libby, I want you to amplify on that one more moment. It is so hard for Americans to really imagine that Israel drops flyers or makes phone calls or sends text messages to Palestinians before some kind of air attack. How literal is that in terms of what Israel does?
And I think these measures are something that we do, and I would be surprised if we could find another military in the world that really goes to the lengths that we do to very much try and not impact the civilian population within the Gaza Strip. And as crazy as it sounds, this idea that we send text messages or drop flyers, these are not buzzwords. This is really, in fact, practice and our operational practice.
Libby, do you really
are sent out?
Okay, Libby, does the IDF really drop flyers?
Of course.
Of course.
Yes.
And does the IDF really make phone calls?
We do.
Okay.
Multiple phone calls.
I don't know why that story isn't trumpeted all over the American media and the world. It is an extraordinary, as you say, an extraordinary and unique perspective of the Israeli army, and it really is amazing. One more thing. We understand that Israel really hopes to avoid sending ground troops into Gaza. Have you been given any indication that you can share with us about what events would necessitate Israel's ever entering Gaza with ground troops?
Well, of course, a decision like that could be someone that has to be made by the political level. But I think that it's clear to everybody here in Israel that at the end of the day, the Israelis are living in this country, and especially the 5 million that are right now in the firing zone of Hamas, people need to return to their daily lives. And to us, it'll be clear that if Hamas continues with missile barrages on the population of this country, then we will not stop until people can leave their shelters, really on the most basic level. We will not stop until the rockets stop. And if it will the decision will be made by the political level, that'll be done through a ground invasion, and that's, of course, what we will do. But we are prepared for any decision that we will receive from the government level here.
Okay. Libby, is Israel at war right now?
I believe that we're constantly in a state of combating terror. I think that right now we find ourselves in an operation. And I try not to focus too much on the language in the sense of is it a war versus is it an operation. Right now, our reality, as I mentioned before, that number, the 5 million residents in this country that are in their shelters. For us, there's no greater priority at this point. There's no greater priority that we have in making sure that those people return to their normal lives. So if we call it an operation, if we call it a war, we're right now in a clear military action against Hamas.
Okay. Libby Weiss, I thank you again for helping to keep us and really all of America who watches Shalom TV briefed on all the events that are occurring in the Middle East, and especially now the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which has been so hard on you, and the American people are sympathetic to the plight of Israel. It is our hope that whatever is necessary happens swiftly and is most effective, and that very, very soon you and your friends and all the Israeli people can return to a normal life. And I thank you for always being there for us. We'll talk again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Libby.
Bye-bye.
Libby Weiss, who again is a spokesperson for the IDF dealing with North America. And again, it's just extraordinary to hear the lengths to which the IDF goes to try to warn the Palestinian people. And, on the one hand, I'm watching the American media cover this event, and I'm hearing, commentators talk about how Israel has, warning sirens and bomb shelters. And obviously, Libby's point is it's because Israel spends money on those things. At the same time, to suggest that the Palestinians are not being warned when the IDF is doing the warning seems to me to be not telling the complete story. And it's hard to visualize, for us to feel the anxiety and the terror and even the fear that grips Israelis as they have to deal with these continued rocket barrage. And I want to show you a video that was taken recently, maybe even today, at an Israeli wedding. And what you're about to see is how, wait, stop the video. I want to set it up. I want to show you a video that was taken at an Israeli wedding, which is suddenly interrupted by warning sirens of a rocket attack. And I want to make sure if we have sound slow, we can also hear this. Unless you ever imagine that Israelis are, blasé, they've become accustomed, inured to the threat of rocket attacks. I want you to listen to the screams you hear when the sirens go off at this wedding hall. Here is this video taken at a wedding reception, and then suddenly there is the warning of a rocket attack from the warning sirens. Let's see it now, Sloan.
כל הקהל להיכנס עכשיו לתוך האולם למרחב מוגן. חבר'ה, יש לנו מעל הראש. להיכנס לאולם, כולם.
Just imagine living with that day after day. Imagine yourself in some space, some place, and you're in a celebration, a birthday party, an anniversary party. Maybe you're at a wedding. You're at a July 4th celebration, for heaven's sakes. Anything at all. Or you're just in a shopping mall. You're in New York City, you're at Bloomingdale's. All over America, there are shopping malls, and you're in, a Macy's. I don't know what stores you have, the Gap. And you're minding your own business and you're shopping with your children yet. And all of a sudden, the sirens go off like that. And again, what affected me when I saw that video, and somebody said it to me, and the reason why I wanted you to see it was, there's this tendency to think Israelis get used to it. And the screams we heard, both from some of the women there, men, for all I know, and also if you heard it, there were babies crying. How do you live that way? How do you live that way? And one of my personal concerns is with the way in which the American media, especially American television, is reporting on this current clash between Israel and the Palestinians. It's so interesting to me that Fox News' flagship program, hosted nightly by Bill O'Reilly, has virtually ignored the fact that one of America's closest allies, Israel, is under a barrage of rocket fire from Palestinian terrorists and jihadists in Gaza. And many Jews argue that Fox is a pro-Israel channel. Then why hasn't Bill O'Reilly, who's always talking about the terrorist threat, why has Bill O'Reilly not done one story on the terrorism coming out of Gaza right now? And why has Fox News started calling Hamas terrorists militants? Militants? A very different meaning than terrorists. While MSNBC calls Hamas terrorists Palestinian fighters, not terrorists, fighters, who engaged in a daring operation to enter the coast of Israel. A daring operation? MSNBC calls a Palestinian terrorist assault on Israel's coast a daring operation? That was the report filed by MSNBC's Ayman Mohyeddin on Morning Joe. And MSNBC labels its coverage of this, the horror right now between Israel and the Palestinians, the Hamas terrorists. They call it, their graphic on the screen is prelude to war. Prelude to war. And Bill O'Reilly said last night, war could break out in the Middle East. What does MSNBC and Fox think is happening right now between Israel and Hamas? What words do Fox and MSNBC want to use to describe 220 rockets being fired across a border into Israel and Israel defending itself with airstrikes? Isn't that war? And by the way, I understand there are technical words, technical circumstances that must exist before you call it a war. You know, the United States never called the action in Vietnam formally a war. We didn't call Iraq, invading Iraq, a war. But human beings know what war is. And when one group of people, a people, fire 220 rockets at civilian cities, and the Israeli Air Force has to try to stop it with its own assaults back into Gaza, that's war. Prelude to war? Might be war? Anyway, for some real assessment of American media coverage of Operation Preventive Edge, we're so pleased to have on our phones right now Gilead, a senior research analyst for CAMRA, the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, an organization that brilliantly monitors the way in which the American media reports on issues related to the State of Israel. And Gilead, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
So, Gilead, give me your sense in general. How has this recent clash between Israel and Hamas, how's it been reported from your perspective? Are there anything at all that bothers you? You may have heard as you were waiting on the phone some of the things that bother me. But look, this is what you do. You're a senior research analyst. What's your sense of American media's coverage of this clash between Israel and the Palestinians?
Well, what we're seeing here, what I'm seeing and what we're seeing here at CAMRA is a reemergence of old patterns and platitudes. And what I mean by that is it seems that when, at times like now, when the moral disproportion is clearest, and what I mean is that when Hamas is intentionally firing rockets, as we all know, towards Israeli civilian centers, and Israel is actually firing warning shots before destroying the houses of Hamas terrorists, and Israel, despite the hundreds of rockets, is actually continuing to facilitate the transfer of humanitarian goods into Gaza. So at a time when it should be most clear and an instructive sort of moment for people on the outside, for news consumers in the U.S. to sort of understand the nature of the conflict, especially when it comes to Hamas and Israel, what we see is when at the worst, we see an attempt to obscure this reality that sort of kicks into high gear. And I don't just mean on Twitter where people are sharing photos from Syria and pretending it's Gaza. And I don't just mean in hateful street protests that we see here in Boston and in San Francisco and in certain other cities. And in fact, I don't just mean the two examples that you just cited, which is Fox News, which is considered to be from the right, and MSNBC, which is considered to be from the left. But in the media that prides itself or claims to be more responsible than Twitter users and more centrist than the more partisan media organizations. And so that would be the New York Times, NPR, Washington Post. I mean, we've seen this pattern that we've seen before of falsehoods, of lack of balance, and of clinging to this cliched narrative. And I can give you examples of what I mean by falsehood.
Please,
for example.
please.
In the New York Times, there was, in recent days, both in a news article and an editorial that claimed that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had been silent for days about the really horrific killing of an Arab child by extremist Mahmoud Abu Khadir, when in fact he had not been silent for days, when in fact Netanyahu had called it a despicable murder. And we intervened and got in touch with New York Times editors, and eventually they corrected and were forced to admit that actually Netanyahu had not been silent. But yet, even in their correction, they downplayed Netanyahu's unequivocal condemnation. They were forced to correct when they were called out, and they said, okay, we admit that he did call it a crime, or he did call for an investigation into the crime. But in fact, Netanyahu called this a despicable murder and a despicable crime. And this feeds into this whole narrative of this false balance between what we know is Palestinian incitement, which is official incitement at the highest channels from the governmental level, and Israeli, and from the Israeli side, what we have is wall-to-wall condemnation of any acts of extremism that come from Israel. Now, by pretending that Netanyahu didn't condemn the murder, they're trying to create this false equivalence, which is one of the patterns that we see over and over again. Another example of a falsehood, or what we also see along with falsehoods, is a clear lack of balance, what we call stacking the deck sometimes. In NPR On Point just yesterday, for example, they brought 3 guests on to speak about the conflict. And those 3 guests were Rashid Khalidi, who is a professor at Columbia, but more than a professor, is a pitchman for the Palestinian side, for the Palestinian cause. Alongside Rashid Khalidi, they had Alan Elsner, who is a representative of J Street, and alongside him they had American diplomat Nicholas Burns. And the fact is, over the course of the program, we heard essentially the same message from all 3 of these guests. Khalidi flatly blamed Israel in a sort of extreme and hostile way. In a slightly more measured way, Alan Elsner criticized Israel, and he said on air that he's actually not so worried about the external threat to Israel. He's more concerned with the internal threat to Israel's soul. In other words, he wants to focus on what he sees as Israeli transgressions and to downplay the rocket fire from Hamas. And the same message from Nicholas Burns, who sort of equivocated and made a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas, and described Mahmoud Abbas as the good guy in the whole conflict. And this is the same Mahmoud Abbas, by the way, who has called Israel's defensive actions in Gaza and Israel's attempts to stop the rocket fire, has compared this to Auschwitz and to genocide. So this on NPR is the good guy. And it's not a mistake. They know who they're bringing on. There are plenty of articulate, moderate, clear-headed voices who can help listeners understand Israel's perspective and for example, the understanding that you've been providing on this network, but they choose not to bring these people on. One more example of clinging to this cliched narrative of, for example, by cliched narrative, I mean the idea, for example, that this is all a tit-for-tat action, or that it all stems from the occupation, or that basically, worse yet, that the whole storyline should be seen regardless of the details and regardless of incidents like this where we see it's not quite the case, of Palestinian victims and Israeli oppression. And how's this narrative promoted? For example, in the New York Times, if you look at the top of the fold, so the front page top of the fold, which is the most prominent and important and influential square foot of paper in the world, probably, we see in recent days a large photo on the top of the fold of a Palestinian teenager who was beaten up by Israel police officers. And a few days before that, we have a large photo of the family of the slain Arab teen mourning and on their sofas. Now, that may be fine to feature examples of Palestinian suffering, but the question is why, throughout the kidnapping, throughout Israel's search for the 3 kidnapped boys, and even after the bodies of the boys were found just about a week ago, the New York Times never once featured a large photo or any sort of photo of the 3 boys on the front page, top of the fold. So how is it that a kid who gets a black eye from Israeli police, which any police brutality and any excessive force should be condemned, of course. But how is it that a kid who has a couple of black eyes is featured on the top front page, top of the fold of the New York Times, but 3 teens who are murdered in cold blood on the Israeli side are buried inside the newspaper?
And what
That's
do you,
Gilad,
Gilad, what do you make of that? You know, I understand the camera's job is really to report how is the media reporting everything going on in the Middle East. But I'm asking you also, when you talk in-house among yourselves, how do you answer that question?
And you're asking about the motivation of
yes. Why would the New York Times never put a picture of 3 kids who were brutally murdered, and yet, as you point out, there's no, we're very sorry that Israeli police would beat any kid. And by the way, today the news came out that Israel has suspended the police officer who did beat So Israel takes this very seriously as well. But the New York Times does an enormous disservice and slants the story, as you're pointing out, by putting the picture, as you say, a boy who was beaten. Okay, we feel bad, but he wasn't killed, and it's not. There's no symmetry there. Why is it that on the one hand, this boy makes the front page of the New York Times, and 3 murdered Israelis don't?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's an important question, and it's one that certainly publicly we try to avoid sort of reading the minds of the journalists and the editors who contribute and create this really sort of this travesty of journalism, this disservice to readers. But if you're asking me personally, look, maybe one way to answer it is this. The New York Times has a long history of downplaying threats to Jews and threats to Israel. And some people say, well, the New York Times is a Jewish newspaper, and so of course they're favorable towards the Jews. First of all, it should be known that that's not actually true. The publisher is not Jewish. But second of all, it has a long history of downplaying threats, even going back as far to the Holocaust, where it's documented, for example, by journalism professor Laurel Leff, who wrote a book called Buried by the Times.
Yes.
That the New York Times buried the story of the genocide against the Jews on the back pages of the newspaper. And this is something that eventually even the New York Times itself has admitted and apologized for. So it's not as if this comes out of the blue, this sort of downplaying of Jewish concerns. It looks like there's a narrative that people high up in the newspaper promote, and they cast themselves as sort of being this responsible model of American objectivity and fairness, as opposed to what could be seen in Europe as a more advocacy type of journalism. But in fact, the New York Times is engaged in advocacy journalism.
Yes.
We even did a study of 6 months of coverage of every single article about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, just to sort of quantify and make sure this isn't just an anecdotal reaction. And we saw that there is a clear-cut pattern of advocacy journalism. And what that means, I think, is that people high up, whether it's the publisher or the editors, intend for a particular story to be pushed. They have an idea of what the story is or should be, which is that Israel is the power and the oppressor, and that the Palestinians have no agency, have no responsibility, and are subject only to Israeli decisions, as if they can't make decisions for themselves. And they hire reporters or promote reporters who understand that this is the storyline that they want to push.
Yes.
And it's a storyline that, okay, if they want that story on the opinion pages, I disagree, but they're entitled to it.
Okay.
But the fact is, despite high-minded promises about a clear separation between the opinion pages and the news pages follow the line that the opinion pages promote also. And that's a problem. That's a problem for journalism, and it's a problem for reader understanding.
I want to ask you one more question, Gilead. I don't know how much you heard of my introduction to your piece. It bothers me that the language has changed. Words really matter. And the United States has designated Hamas as a terrorist organization. When a news agency, whether it is MSNBC or whether it's Fox or whether it's any reputable American channel, stops using the word terrorist and calls them words which have a very different emotional resonance, militants or combatants, as opposed to terrorists, it changes perception. Do you have any insight on, number one, why have channels begun to use words that are much more, that are not nearly as inflammatory, but at the same time, they don't convey the reality? Why is this happening? And is it happening because of the American administration?
You're absolutely right that words matter. I think that's the essential point that people need to pay attention to, and that journalists need to remember. Words do matter. And the problem you describe is accurate. And there's two ways journalists can do this. If they can either understand that terrorism generally is understood to refer to the intentional targeting of civilians for political aims and describe Hamas as terrorists, or if they feel uncomfortable doing that, they can still inform their readers or listeners in a fair way by pointing out Hamas, which is designated as a terror organization by the U.S., Europe, and other countries, EU, which is an essential bit of information, which is context that's necessary for people to understand the conflict, and which can create that sort of distance between the journalists themselves and what they may see as a judgmental term, terrorist, which it's actually a term with a precise meaning. But fine, if they want to avoid it, they can at least do their job and report on the status of Hamas in the international community. But you're absolutely right. This isn't happening nearly enough. Sometimes we do see, every once in a while, we do see descriptions of Hamas as, for example, seen by Israel as a terror organization. A small step in the right direction, but hardly a fair accounting. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we see seen by Israel and the U.S. as a terror organization, getting warmer, but still stopped short of the international view of Hamas.
Yes.
But it's not difficult for them to do. This is their job. Their job is to contextualize and explain and inform readers. As to why that's not the case, it ties back into the larger question.
Yes.
It ties back into the whole, which is that there's a tendency, not by every journalist and not by every news outlet, but a tendency to want to promote a particular narrative and to sort of share that context to help people understand that there are people on the Palestinian side who are seen and designated by governments as terrorists and do engage in terrorist acts. It deviates from the story that they'd like to tell.
Yes. It seems to me that part of the problem some of the media have is that this events, all the events that began with the kidnapping and the brutal murder of the 3 Israeli teens, from then on till now, there's an exposure of why it's been so hard for there to be an implementation of a Palestinian-Israeli peace, and that those who would like to blame Israel have a problem because this is in your face what Israel has to face daily and why it's been so hard to reach an accommodation. And as a result, there's an attempt here to just soft pedal it. And it's very, very important that camera and to some extent Shalom TV make sure people don't miss the subtlety of language as it is being shaped to tell a story or not tell a story. In any case, Gilead, you've been so kind. You're very good. I would love to be able to turn to you often and help our audience really have a sense of how the media in general is handling anything going on in the Middle East. So I hope you'll permit me to call you often. I am very, very grateful for you taking time to be on Shalom TV today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure, and feel free to reach out again.
Thank you. Gilead Ainey, a senior research analyst for Camera. We've wanted to hear what you have to say. We've been covering this now for days, and it's wonderful having the experts that we're able to get for you, who hopefully can fill in some of the gaps in your own understanding and can bring some real perspective to what's going on. At the same time, we very, very much would like to hear from you. So I'm going to speak in one moment with Jonathan Morsey, who is in Ashkelon right now, and I'll tell you why. But I want to put our phone number up on the screen. And even if we can get 1 or 2 calls in from you, I really want to hear any reaction you've had as you've watched this story unfold in front of your eyes. Our phone number is 201-242-1142. And again, in just a few moments, if there are any of you who would like to speak with me, we're going to put you on the air. At the moment, I want to go to Ashkelon, which is right near Gaza, where Jonathan Morsey is the international spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense. And I understand, Jonathan, you are with a group of foreign journalists who've come down to Israel to cover this event. And we're hoping you can give us a sense of what the atmosphere is in the room where you are now and what you found the international media's reaction to be and their response is to all the events that have transpired over certainly the last few days as Operation Protective Edge has unfolded. Jonathan, thank you for joining us, first of all, and what can you tell us?
Thank you for having me. What can I tell you? Right now in Ashkelon, just to give a little background, the government press office established a foreign media center in Ashkelon, a center providing information, Wi-Fi, reporters available for foreign reporters that come into Israel, that are either on their way to the Gaza Strip, coming out of the Gaza Strip, and touring throughout southern Israel, whether it be in Ashkelon or in Sderot or the different Iron Dome batteries. And it's kind of a center for them to come, meet with Israeli government reporters, get information, and from there file their stories and do interviews and things like that. I have to say in the past few days there have been many, many foreign reporters that are flowing into Israel.
How many, Jonathan, how many? How many are with you?
Today alone, there are more than 30 that came into Israel. It started as a trickle, a few a day in the past week, and today, as I said, above 30, and tomorrow also we're expecting between 30 to 40 reporters to come into Israel. And usually there are many reporters, many international reporters in Israel, so it's above and beyond that. And we're looking at more and more reporters coming in greater and greater numbers.
It must keep you very busy, Jonathan.
Absolutely very busy. The feelings that we're getting so far from the foreign press, the reporters here, is more or less positive. We're definitely getting the feeling that they understand the predicament Israel's in. They understand the feeling of the citizens living in southern Israel. The reporters hear the rockets, they hear the sirens going off, and when they see Israeli residents running for cover, they do the same.
Yes.
They're looking for cover. Just this morning there was a television crew filming in Sderot, and the siren went off, and in the middle of live TV, they ran for cover just like the Israeli residents. So they definitely get the feeling what it's like. And overall, at least here in Israel, we have the feeling that there is a legitimacy for the continued Israeli IDF action in the Gaza Strip. But of course, we said that everybody's waiting to see what the next step is going to be.
I understand.
Everybody's waiting both in Israel and the foreign press. What's going to be the next step?
Jonathan, by any chance, have you seen any countries send correspondents in who may not have been covering the Israeli-Palestinian conflict before, or who you feel have a better perspective now of the conflict because of events over the last 2 days and really 3 weeks?
I definitely think so. Without going to specific names or agencies, there were at least 2 or 3 journalists that I met with personally. It wasn't their first time in Israel, but I think after spending a little bit of time here, given the current circumstances, they definitely had a better understanding of the situation, and I think that's absolutely very important. And we, of course, try to give them as much information as possible, but just being here and feeling, getting the experience has definitely, I'd like to open their eyes to what's been going on. And they've also understood that in the past few weeks, Israel has been on the receiving end of many rockets.
Yes.
The IDF and the Israeli government has been acting with restraint. And I think at a certain point, everybody recognizes that Israel has a responsibility and a right to defend its citizens, and action needs to be taken. And I think that goes a long way in convincing and demonstrating the Israeli government's policy.
It is wonderful to hear what you have to say, and I'm so appreciative that you were able to steal a few moments for us this late at night in Israel. Jonathan, we will reach out to you often. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Whenever you guys need, and hopefully we won't have to discuss these issues again, and the fire will stop. And that'll be it.
Thank you very much. Jonathan Mosseri, who is the international spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense. I want to go to your calls now. And again, do me a favor. Number one, if you're on the air, please turn your television down so that there's no delay and you can speak to me right away. Make your comment as brief as possible so that I can get a few calls in here before the end of the hour. We begin by going to Woodmere, and I welcome Anita into the program. Anita, thank you for joining us.
May Hashem bless you and all those you interview.
Thank you, sweetheart.
But it is still extremely frustrating. What can we, as a nation, do I mean, I feel like it's an exercise in futility almost.
Yes.
Whatever you say and whatever you do and the people you have on, the rest of the world is not seeing and hearing.
Well, first of all, Anita, I would like to believe that there are many Americans and American Jews who really have received a much broader sense of why the State of Israel, what the State of Israel is having to contend with. So I'm pleased with that. And again, we have many, many people who are not Jewish who watch Shalom TV and who love Shalom TV and who let me know that all the time, and I am so appreciative. And the other thing I would say is, it's very important for us to be as sophisticated as we possibly can be, because, Anita, we run into people all the time and we end up in dialogues with them. The more we know, the better we will be able to communicate what I believe is an effective, objective view of what's going on in the Middle East. Finally, it's cliche, but it's true. We should be communicating with our elected officials. It bothers me that the United States of America has not taken a more vocal position on this is not new. The Palestinian assault on Israel has been going on for years and years and years. And it's time for the United States to say, I want the United States to say it, I want the European Union to say it, I want everybody any nation of conscience, I want them to say loudly and clearly to the Palestinian people, it is no longer acceptable for you to take the position that Israel should not exist. And either you stop all of the incitement and violence, or you will lose our support. You lose our economic support, you lose our moral support, you will lose any support we have in trying to encourage Israel to engage in a peace process. So those are some of the things I would say to anybody who would ask me, what do I do? Anyway, that was Anita from Woodmere, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for making the comment you did. Let me see if we have anybody else on the phone. Okay, again, let's put our phone number back up on the screen. 201-242-1142. If you have anything to say yourself about how you feel events of the last 3 weeks since the Israeli teens were kidnapped, right through Operation Protective Edge, do any of you share my uneasiness with the way in which, A, the American media has not covered this event as it covers other events, and two, this subtle change in language, which no longer calls Hamas a terrorist operation, a terrorist group. And remember, Hamas is labeled a terrorist organization by the United States government. And if there are briefings in the White House press room, any spokesperson, Jay Carney has now gone off to other things, whoever is now going to be speaking on behalf of the American administration, they should use the term Hamas terrorists. They're not militants. And they don't engage in daring raids. You know, the good guys engage in daring raids. Here, very often in life, it's hard to determine who the good guys and the bad guys are. Life is not made up most of the time of black and white, but shades of gray. Here, you have black and white. And it's time for America to really, in an attempt to be a, quote, honest broker, one can't compromise on the truth. And one can't compromise on being ready to call evil evil and to demand that the other side be willing to live in peace with the state of Israel, the Jewish state of Israel. We're going to go to White Plains now and welcome Janet. Janet, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for hearing my call.
Absolutely.
Mark, I love Shalom TV. I watch it constantly, all day long.
That's lovely.
You're doing a wonderful service.
Thank you, dear.
Mark, I have been listening to all the newscasts, NBC News, PBS News, and I'm very, very upset at their coverage. Last night on PBS News, they started by showing all the Palestinians running for cover, being bombed. They started it there. Not once did they say that bombs are coming into Israel first. They do not portray Israel as being bombed by Hamas, not once. And also, NBC News doesn't cover it fairly. I am so upset as the news coverage. Israel is not being portrayed fairly. They do not portray Israel as being bombed by Hamas first.
Yes.
It is not being covered fairly. I'm so upset all day long at the coverage of the United States towards Israel. And even PBS, this is shocking. And I'm just seething all day long at the coverage. It is just not fair.
Janet, what do you think is behind it?
I think it's anti-Semitism from everybody. Nobody likes Jews. And that is what is behind everything. And it just makes my blood boil at this anti-Semitism pervasive around the world and even in the United States.
Janet, I appreciate the comment very much, and I appreciate the kind things you had to say. Keep watching Shalom TV.
I will. What do you think about it, Mark, about the coverage here in the United States?
Okay. Janet, as I've said already, I am very, very concerned. You know, I don't want to say it's anti-Semitic. What I do feel is that there is, in the American media, a bias against Israel. Now, sometimes anti-Israel is a cover for anti-Semitism. I think the BDS movement is primarily, fundamentally, at its core, anti-Semitism. When it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there is, unfortunately, a misunderstanding. Very often, the American people and the American media wants to side with the underdog. And the underdog at the moment seems to be the Palestinian. It really is a mischaracterization. One of the smartest things the Arab world ever did was change the frame of discussion from the Arab-Israeli conflict to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The truth is, Israel is not simply dealing with a Palestinian problem. It's dealing with a pan-Arab problem. If the Arab world ever wanted the Palestinians to make peace with Israel, it would happen overnight. There are so many in the Arab world who do not want a peace between Israel and Palestinians because they don't want a Jewish state in the region. Many in the American media just don't understand that. And as a result, the entire discussion, the entire presentation of the news is framed in such a way that makes Israel look bad. And it is very upsetting to me. We're going to continue to deal with this over and over again. I will not let this go. I believe Shalom TV is trying to give you as it's not about fair and balanced. It's an attempt to give you the truth. We're trying to give you the truth as best we can. Anyway, we're almost grabbed by the clock once again. I want to thank you all for being part of the Shalom TV family. It's really marvelous to be able to talk with you. We'll be back again, hopefully later tonight. In any case, right now, my thanks to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, Dara Golub, as well as to Carol Lilienthal and to Ron Jacobson. And on the camera, Igor Funk. Thank you so much to all of you who participate and make Shalom TV possible. Until we meet you hopefully again at 6:30 tonight, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.